Welcome to Freaked Out with your co-hosts, Liz and Landon.
What's up, everybody?
I really do hope a lot of you get to listen to this episode. This has been an episode that is a long time coming. I know his little face has been staring at me for quite a while, so I finally brought myself up to the courage to finally do this episode, and obviously you guys chose, to pick this one as well. So it is going to be an extremely tough one, so just listener's discretion is advised.
Exactly. Now, the kid ones are harder than the adult ones, so sometimes we do a kid case. It's very difficult for Liz, and I make sure that afterwards, after we do these episodes, I definitely take her away from this element and just get her to enjoy her time. So you guys, don't worry about her. I can promise you that I take good care of her.
You really do, especially this case. I mean, it's a very bizarre, strange turn of events, and we fell down this rabbit hole, and I'm glad we got to do it, so.
Mrs. Walsh was heading to Sears to get herself a lamp. She had been looking for this lamp for some time, and according to sources, it was on sale this particular day. So she headed to Sears with her 6-year-old son, Adam, to get this lamp.
Upon arriving, Adam instantly noticed the Atari in the toy section, and I believe that he begged and pleaded his mom to hang out there while she was getting her lamp. There were 3 other boys there also playing on the Atari, so he joined them. They were older children, and most of these kids were teenagers.
Now, Mrs. Walsh was only gone for about 10 minutes, and then Adam was gone. She looked all over the toy department. She could not find him. She did what every parent would automatically do in this situation. She went up to the nearest employee to let them know that her son had gone missing and asked if they had seen him. They decided to announce this over the intercom. Now, I remember kids' names always being called over the intercom over and over again when I was younger as well.
Me too. Even in my adulthood, it happens so often. It's actually crazy and scary as hell. I always cringe and hold my breath when I see and hear it, especially when it's a young child. Luckily, I've never been in a predicament where the child was not found.
Now, Adam's grandmother just so happened to be at Sears as well, and when she heard Adam being called over the intercom, Mrs. Walsh and her ended up running into each other. Now, the more help, the better.
They both tried looking for him all over. They looked for 2 hours. They decided to contact the police. The police station was just across the street from the mall, and the Father John then came in on the search for Adam.
Now, upon investigation with other employees, they had determined a little later that the kids that were playing with the Atari, the older ones, were having a fight, and that one of the employees escorted the kids outside of the store, and Adam was included in on that.
Now, the employee had indicated that she had asked Adam if he knew where his parents were, and the rest of those kids knew where their parents were, obviously, and he didn't say anything at all, so she probably assumed he was a younger sibling of the older ones.
Now, since Adam didn't say anything, it is safe to say that she would assume that. We also want to point out that this employee had led Adam outside of a different entrance than he had originally came in through.
As a very young child being kicked out of a store, not sure what to do next, all by himself, all these other kids just left him there.
The mother was so worried that she left her car at the mall with notes on it saying, "Don't worry, we'll be here to pick you up. Stay near the car."
A week later, and still nothing. Eventually, the FBI was brought in. Now, a lot of people are upset with the police department because it was a small police department and they had never dealt with anything like this in the past. And although they were very small, they were also very disorganized. So a lot of slip-ups and a lot of missed opportunities.
The police department did claim that they were disorganized for this type of case and apologized for their lack of assistance.
2 weeks after the disappearance of Adam, they decided to bring in the family and they decided to do a couple of polygraph tests on the father.
Now, they were able to clear the family members, but they did find out that there was a guy by the name of James, and he was living with the family, and he just moved out a week prior to Adam's disappearance. Now, James was only 26 at the time.
They did bring him in for questioning as well, and he also passed, and so did the mom and grandma.
Now, sadly, approximately only 2 weeks after his disappearance, they had made a discovery. 2 people were walking across the bay near mile marker 131, and these 2 individuals were there fishing, and one had told the other that they had a lot of luck in this area fishing.
Upon realizing very quickly that it was a human head, they ended up calling in the police department.
Now, they were not able to do a lot of searching in the water because this particular area, there were a lot of alligators.
And sadly, nothing else was found, but they were able to determine that the head did belong to Adam Walsh.
With a few autopsies, they were able to determine that Adam's head had been chopped off because there was multiple chopping wounds.
The medical examiner, at least the second one anyway, determined that he had 6 chops to the head and that he was face down and most likely had been done post-mortem.
The family had a funeral, and then they decided to get to work and set up the Adam Walsh Outreach Center for Missing Children. They did this all from their garage, attempting to solve their son's case and also other missing children cases.
Now, the list of suspects was unreal, and from what I gather, a lot of people were sick and twisted and gave them a lot of tips that sent the police on wild goose chases, but in reality, all of these stories were fabricated.
They had started to look into somebody by the name of Edward James. An inmate had come forward and claimed that he had been bragging about it and that the police would never find the blood in his car.
Now, he did have a history of abducting kids. Edward James replaced the seat covers, but they quickly determined it was not him, but it did lead their investigation to another person.
Well, shockingly, Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, this was before Jeffrey Dahmer was pinpointed as a serial killer.
Witnesses say they had seen a blue van that people had seen Adam get into, and they claimed that Jeffrey Dahmer may have been the one driving the blue van.
Now, Jeffrey Dahmer just was removed from the military, and he had taken his flight to Miami, which was only 20 minutes away from where Adam Walsh was abducted.
They asked Jeffrey if he had gone anywhere during his time, and he had said he went down to the beach, but he didn't go to Hollywood, Florida. He had gone to Fort Lauderdale with a couple of his friends for a few days.
I definitely do not believe that it was Jeffrey Dahmer, because at this point, Jeffrey was not escalated at this time. Perhaps maybe it was a couple years later for sure, but I can understand why people would claim that it would be him, but I just don't sense Jeffrey's involvement at all, and Adam doesn't really fit Jeffrey's MO.
You know, I don't feel that way either. Jeffrey did a lot of crazy things, which is why he was on the radar for the police most of the time, but I also don't believe he was capable either. I agree. He liked his victims to be at least hitting their puberty stage.
Absolutely. Adam was only 6 years old, which not sexually driven at all. Now, they did end up releasing a movie called Adam, and they even had a hotline number at the end of the movie, and if you had any details, you were urged to call. Only a day after the movie was premiered, they had gotten another tip.
Otis Toole, who was at the time currently sitting in jail for related arson crimes. He was one half of the 2 serial killers that used to call themselves the confession killers. Now, at the time, he was driving a Cadillac, and he claims he decided that in that moment, he had seen a kid and started to talk to him about video games, and then he decapitated the child with a machete.
Now, obviously, it's because Adam had been decapitated that they started to take his words a little more seriously, so they sat down and listened. Then he had come up with an elaborate story indicating that he and his counterpart, Henry Lucas, had decided to kidnap this child, and then they killed the child, and that they threw his head out in the interstate. He indicated that he burned the rest of the remains at his mother's home in Jacksonville, Florida, and the property had since been burned down by the hands of Otis.
The confession killers would often confess to murders that they did not do. Otis confessed to over 125 murders, and Henry actually confessed to over 600 murders.
Now, most of these were false confessions. Big shock there. These 2 men met in a soup kitchen and apparently fell in love based upon their love of murder. They went on a nationwide murder spree. According to sources, they would basically live out of their vehicle and pay cash everywhere they went, which was why they were able to get away with a lot of this, because they just drove around killing people that they felt like murdering in that moment.
Absolutely. Now, just an FYI, as I'm starting to do this case, I had an overwhelming feeling of Otis. I felt his energy and he wanted to talk. He frightens me, though. It was a very difficult decision, but I did end up talking to him for a brief period of time. But we'll get back to that a little later.
I didn't even know about this part, but it makes sense since you were extremely exhausted by the end of the night. But just an FYI, guys, Henry was convicted of 9 murders and Otis was convicted of 6. Now, Henry Lucas killed his own mother, and he also killed Otis's niece, which we will get into those details later.
So the police decided that they were going to talk to Otis about what the description of Adam was. And ironically enough, he actually said that he was curly blonde hair, sneakers, and was actually quite the opposite description of what Adam actually looked like.
Unfortunately, they had done a thorough search and realized that Henry Lucas was incarcerated at the time of Adam Walsh's disappearance, and certainly could not have been involved in his murder at all either.
So Otis again decided in that moment he was going to change his story. He then said that he lured Adam towards him with candy and toys and had originally decided he wanted to raise Adam as his own child, so he had someone to love him. But as he sat there talking to Adam, apparently he realized that the child was pretty smart and he knew it would be a problem and he wouldn't be able to mind control him as easy, I guess.
Now, according to Otis, he then decided to pull over and kill him and gave all these details about how he was laying face down and took about 5 or 6 blows to end up decapitating him. He felt like he had to kill him because he thought that Adam was going to identify him as his captor later on.
The police felt like since it was fairly close to the, original details of the case, they felt like they were onto something here. But they also had given him small details about the case, so he would use the exact details against those police officers. They asked him why he was blaming Henry for this, and he said he wanted to get his ass back because he had dumped him about a year prior and decided to run away with Otis's 13-year-old niece, which he ended up killing that little girl anyway.
Wow, these two are really sick individuals.
You're telling me. Now, the police brought in the car to see if there would be any evidence. The vehicle was impounded and put back on a lot because Otis couldn't pay the monthly payments on the vehicle. And then they ended up selling this vehicle later on to another car dealership. Now, blood was there, but they did not have a lot of forensic testing back then, so they couldn't really determine what kind of blood this was.
Now, then they took Otis a few miles away to see if they can get some genuine, solid proof and sense if he lied or not. They did take him to 2 different malls, and the first mall they took him to was nowhere that Adam was, and he then rejected that right away. He then was taken to the mall that Adam was abducted at, and he did say that this was a familiar place, but he was too drunk, and later recanted that story yet again.
Oh, God, this guy took them on a wild goose chase. He confessed, and then he recanted, and then confessed again, and then recanted again.
I personally believe that he just wanted to go back to the place that he killed or abducted this kid so that he can relive this murder because he gets off on it. And considering that he enjoyed having conversations about being a cannibal, it really doesn't surprise me because most serial killers like to do that. They enjoy having access and will give little bits and pieces of information, but in reality, they will take the full truth with him to the grave.
That absolutely makes sense. And for those of you who don't know, but Otis and Henry used to have conversation on the phone from prison to prison, I believe. I'm not sure. But they would talk about eating people. So makes total sense. Anyways, Otis Toole did work in a place where he did have access to machetes, and they were not able to locate the machete that would have been at his workplace for him to use. So it's definitely very possible that he took it.
Now, they did test items, but they were not able to determine if Toole had used this to murder Adam Walsh or not.
They did find a pair of green shorts near his mother's property, not able to determine if it was Adam's. even though he spent a lot of time in his mother's house digging in the backyard.
Now, that is a lot of unconnected dots. It definitely seems extremely disorganized.
Oh, yeah. And then this Toole guy was dying in prison and recanted again, of course, and then apparently on his deathbed confessed to killing him again.
Not enough to convict, though, sadly, but the police did look at it as a solved case because he had confessed, and there were a lot of similarities in his stories, and they just could not find the evidence, but they tried their absolute hardest to make up for everything else that they screwed up on.
They closed it and felt like Otis did it.
Now, many, many years later, they wanted to conduct another investigation with advancements in DNA testing, but unfortunately, the Hollywood police lost the evidence for this case.
This is one of those moments where you smack yourself in the head. I'm just so livid because all you want to do is just get some sort of break in this case.
They apparently had sent some of the items be tested at certain labs and that they never had gotten the items back, but they did come back and they were checked in, so they're kind of unsure of where this stuff went. This seems like it just vanished.
I know where those items went.
Care to elaborate?
They were tossed in the garbage. Now, Adam, by the way, he shows me that the items were tossed in the garbage. He shows me it was a rookie cop, hell, even 2 rookie cops. They were assigned to do something back there, and I believe it was more so to organize and downsize the evidence room. Bitch work. And they threw out a lot of evidence. And they also threw away, Adam's stuff. I feel like the police may at some point stumble upon some sort of signing in and out sheet, but I don't believe they'll ever share that information because then they would be held accountable for the evidence being thrown away, They're just trying to leave this case where it lay and not disrupt anything else.
Well, that's good to know. I was going to ask if you felt Adam at all, but you already answered that question.
Yeah, this is actually a really cool one, thankfully. Now, Adam has decided to age, and he's a grown man. He does talk to me about his childhood images and wants to show them to me, but mostly he's an adult and he pulls from his childhood memories. He is a lot like his father. He says that if he was able to grow up, alive, he would be doing exactly what his dad is doing. His dad never stops. There isn't a day that goes by that his father isn't his hero. He loves him a lot. He was so confident in his relationship and he was a happy kid. He had 0 angry moments as a child and he had a very loving, supportive family who didn't give up on him. And he decided to grow up and decided to do his own investigation. So that's exactly what we plan to do today.
This was not a familiar case for Liz, so she was way too young, in fact, wasn't even born at the time when Adam was abducted. But with that being said, we found out recently that we grew up with an attachment to Adam's family without even realizing it.
Absolutely. Now, I loved watching Unsolved Mysteries, even as a kid, and then growing up as an adult. It was one of my favorite shows to watch. Obviously, as a kid, I would sit there and I would come up with my own conclusions of things I believed, but as an adult, I'm feeling like they weren't necessarily conclusions. Perhaps I was being told, but I guess I'll never know. Anyways, John Walsh from Unsolved Mysteries, this is his son's case. So it's our honor to cover it. He has such a wholesome vibe to him, and Adam is absolutely his replica.
Now that just gives it a whole new meaning. It's good to converse with someone who has some sort of connection to your own life. I always used to wonder who his child was because he was always talking about it to people, and I always had some curiosity of who it was. Before Google was available at our fingertips.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm older than Google and I'm older than Yahoo. And unless we had a computer to check facts, you weren't looking at anything, perhaps maybe an encyclopedia. But you couldn't really look things up in this manner. And by the time I would get to a computer, because I was very limited, I was only allowed to be on the computer for an hour. Normally I would spend time talking to my friends on MSN or ICQ. I wouldn't be searching things up unless it was pictures of celebrities that I liked or printed out to put on my wall. Either way, I did not spend my time wisely. Even when I was doing my homework, I barely did homework on a computer.
Exactly. Now that we know, we're going to give it our absolute best.
Alrighty. Adam remembers pretty much every single detail. He remembers the smell of the store. He remembers the fragrance aisle, and it was overwhelming. He remembers the kids fighting with each other. He even shows me that he was pushed. Not hard or in a bad way, but because the kids were fighting each other, hands-on, he was getting kind of beaten up in the middle. He was able to play the Atari for a very brief moment. He had just gone on it, which is why he gave no mind. He was completely and utterly dedicated to this video game and entranced by it. He had been dreaming of this video game, and he shows me that that was his complete mindset. He paid attention to absolutely nothing else. So when the woman started to yell at the kids, and she was really giving it to them and asked them to leave. Now, he didn't leave right away. She then put her hand on his shoulder and said, "You too, sir." And he went out the door with her. He was unsure of how he felt in that moment because it happened so quickly.
I wish he had spoken up, honestly.
Me too, but from what he shows me, maybe this minor detail was left out because, I don't know, the employee was worried they would get in trouble. He was trying to say something, and this employee kind of stopped him halfway. Between the toy section and the door, she was shuffling him out the door saying, "I don't want to hear it." After that, she then told them all to leave. And then if they came back, that she would call the cops next time. Obviously, that's going to scare anyone who's 6 years old. Obviously, the teenager started to scream obscenities to her, and then he just stood there. She did not ask him about where his parents were. She assumed that he was one of the teenage kids' siblings. He was having a little bit of like a meltdown. Was acting kind of like a baby. He wasn't crying, but he was like whimpering and visibly upset. He wasn't screaming or anything, but he was definitely pouting and had his arms crossed. I even believe he went up against a wall once everyone had left.
I just don't understand how this person at the store didn't realize okay, maybe he doesn't belong with them. Why would this kid be acting this way? Or even call after the kids hey, is this one of your guys' brothers? Come and get him. And then they could have been no, we don't know who that is. Then you obviously move on to the next steps. You don't belong to them. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Even just escorting children out of the store. I think that they should at least check and see okay, you're coming with me. And then go to the front, be are you with blah, 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 to see if the parents.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Asking the teenager specifically, is this your brother? And then they would say no. And then you move on. This kid was 6.
I know. I agree.
Well, did he ever think of going back inside the store?
I mean, no. He was worried he was going to get arrested. After a while, he started to wonder where his mom was, and he wanted to tell her all about his upset and how frustrated he was that he got kicked out of the store. He didn't recognize any of where he was, obviously, so he started to look for his mother's vehicle because he did know what his mother's vehicle looked like. And honestly, I personally believe that his mother received a sign that, he wanted a connection to the vehicle. So that's probably why she left her car. It's kind of interesting. I just figured I'd give you guys that little bit of information.
So as he was sitting outside, what happened next?
I believe that Otis was the one who not only kidnapped him, but murdered him as well. There are so many little details about this. I'm going to try to capture as much as I possibly can. First and foremost, every little story he told, he gives a little piece of it. And the first part that was actually true is that he indicated he was trying to entice the child by talking about video games. But that took place after he had asked him if he was okay. I feel like Adam was in the parking lot looking for the vehicle, and he had seen him kind of searching around looking for his mom, and he couldn't find her. And Otis said, "Hey, are you okay?" And he told him, obviously, couldn't find my mom. And he was worried that she had left the mall. And he had said that she was in Sears, and he kind of gave him a little brief detail of the story. Now, obviously, Otis then circled around the parking lot and was looking around to make sure nobody else was around. There were a few people walking by. Then he said, "Hey, why don't I help look for your mom?" He said, and then when we find her, he's going to do something even better. He'll buy him the Atari game because he wants a kid to play that game with. I see that Adam agreed and jumped in the car.
So since the kid got in willingly, there would be no reason for people to notice anything strange about it, like somebody shoving him in the car.
Exactly. Now, especially since Otis had looked around and was paying attention, Adam looked like he belonged in the vehicle, and he was excited and he felt like he was a hero in that moment. Although the guy had a bit of an odd look to him, he had met a few odd-looking people in the past, so he didn't discriminate.
Well, both Otis and Henry are a very odd-looking pair, so I know that they claim to be lovers, but I just can't see it.
They were definitely not gay. They did not have a sexual relationship. It was more so they would enjoy cannibalism together, and perhaps maybe jerking off together would be considered a gay relationship. I don't know.
Well, thanks for clarifying for that. And they look like they really enjoyed eating people, so they definitely have that look to them.
Oh, I agree. Anyways, I see that he had seen a couple of people at a nearby park. He decided to go and pickpocket these people at the park. Then he decided to take Adam to some diner. Now, he left him in the car because he didn't want anyone to say, hey, there's a missing child, blah, blah, blah. He just went inside, grabbed a bunch of hot dogs and french fries, and brought the food out to him. And that's when the two of them had conversation. Then at that point, after they ate, Adam then was asking, hey, like, when are we going to look for my mom? And then he was kind of worried that his mom would leave. And then Adam kept saying, you know, I really want to see my mom. I really want to see my mom. And Otis obviously is not somebody who's hanging out with kids often. He was getting a little bit frustrated with him. Adam then said he wanted his dad and that he and his dad had some plans and he didn't want to miss them. And it was almost bedtime soon, so he just wanted to go home, and he told him he knew how to get home. If he just took him back to the mall, he can figure it out from there. Otis then told him he wasn't taking him anywhere, and I also feel like he had like a 6-pack of beer on him as well, which was sitting in the car as he was drinking, by the way. I think he even offered Adam a drink. Anyways, Adam was not interested in any of that, and I think it's why Otis realized that, you know, this kid was not troubled, and he would continuously want his parents, regardless of how like much he tried to convince him otherwise, you know? So he just wanted to go back to his mom, and Otis was not having it.
Well, what happens next?
Well, from what I can see, he did not feel comfortable with just slicing and dicing the child, even though he spent some time trying to like go back and forth with his conscience. I guess we'll call it that anyway. So from what I see, Otis had a blanket in the back of his trunk, and from what he shows me, he suffocated Adam and held him down for a while. And that was when he decided he was going to preserve the body in a cooler. I think that he may have had it in the trunk as well. It looks like one of those tin foil coolers. Anyways, I believe that he discarded the head to remove the remaining evidence. But ultimately, I feel like he ate Adam. I do feel like Otis was completely mentally unhinged. And by the way, when he does try to come through and tell me about the story, which is really crazy because he didn't remember a lot of details even after he passed on, but from the sounds of it, Adam reminded him. Adam is not afraid of him. Adam faces his fear, and Otis is stuck. He has not crossed over in any way. Even when he decides that he's ready to go, he's going to the bad place. Adam tells me that while eating people, he had a preference of eating different types of people, and that he was interested in talking about that to me. And of course, I was not interested in hearing about it and how he got off. He liked eating children because they had this veal taste to them. Ugh. Anyways, Adam, by the way, has been reached out by many mediums that have tried to communicate with him. And unfortunately, Otis kind of interferes a lot of the time. This person stands directly in front of him and wants to talk about cannibalism, so it's beyond disturbing. But I've got my powerhouse Eileen, who was kind of able to kind of force him down. She would be screaming at him, calling him a sick fuck. She literally got in his face. But anyways, she always has to tell me that she is not the same as these kinds of people. The other thing I want to mention is that he does end up taking the bones of all of his victims to his mother's house. And like we had said earlier, he likes to go to his mom's house and dig in the back. Well, normally he has bonfires or buries these bones, and obviously the neighbors did see him doing that. He used to do it with animal bones as well, which is why they were able to find a few animal bones on property. but I think it goes a little further out on the property with people's bones. Adam knows that his family has since let go and don't necessarily want to know the details, but he did want to share them today, maybe for everybody else. He shows me that he didn't really suffer too badly. He did suffocate, obviously, from a blanket, but he's showing me that it was the better option. Originally, Otis wanted to decapitate him while he was alive, but then, thought against it. So apparently Otis loves watching the body shake after someone gets decapitated. He is extremely gruesome.
Wow, what a heavy episode. I know how difficult this one was for you, but I'm glad that Adam came to you without any issues and seems to be doing pretty well.
Absolutely. He's absolutely like his dad. Now he solves crimes on the other side. He solves crimes on the heavenly side and helps spirits find their way back home, getting the closure they need as well. So it's kind of cool.
Well, next week we will be covering the case of Jelani Day. I believe Liz did do a TikTok on this case very briefly a couple years back, but she has some more information and would like to do a full episode of what took place with Jelani. Until next time, guys, stay freaked out.